This is Cory, and Cory Brown comes from Alfred, New York, is where he has grad school. That's where he lives now, and he's got a show at Intandem Gallery middle of May, and we just wanted to kind of grill him on his work. And John Britt's over here, and so we just wanted to chat and talk about Cory and have Cory tell us about stuff. So. You're on board now.
When is the opening of the show?
It's May 17th.
Okay.
So we got about a month. We're a month ahead, but I bet people will be seeing this and it'll be right now, probably.
Probably.
Right.
Well, I got a question about how did your work happen here? How did you evolve into this type of design?
So I'm interested in making discoveries, right? That's what feeds me every day in the studio. I want to find something out, asking what if. And this work really lends itself to that because, each piece is an experiment essentially, and
Well, I guess what I should probably say first is this very interesting type of So you're doing like ceramic forms and then turning glaze into drippiness. So it's kind of an unusual approach to ceramics, is what I was meaning.
Oh yeah. Well, it's an evolution of my work. I've been making colored clay for a long time, and but I make glazes for a living, and I think it's a natural evolution to be moving the colored clay into glaze. And so I'm calling this Nerikomi glaze, right? So I made patterns out of what looked like clay, but that clay was in fact glaze, and you can see the pattern here a little bit more clearly, right? And so when this started on here, it was about 2 inches thick of glaze.
Yeah, wow.
And then the pieces were suspended on posts in the kiln that allowed the glaze to melt through, and then the glaze has become the foot.
Okay.
But I think it's interesting how it's related to my older work. I have this cup here from what I was making before, which you know me for before, and this is actually the kind of work that I was making when you originally asked me to be in the show, and my work has just evolved. But it's interesting because this work, I put the pattern on and I twisted it essentially. And the twist and the movement was what made the work interesting. It put life into the work. And so it was really like this collaboration with a little bit of chaos, or it's like a little bit of, chaos factor mixed in. And so I feel like this is the same way. Like I work in a controlled way. Like you can see, it's a very square grid. Right. This form is very precise. It's not all that loose. I throw tight. I make tight forms. And so I need this chaos to make the work feel alive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I love ceramics. I'm fascinated with materials, and I like to set up situations where I can let the ceramic materials be their most beautiful.
So in this case, the melting is the chaos, or the heat, or...
Exactly. And now the kiln has become a much more critical tool. It's almost like the wheel at this point, because it's not like I just program my firing and go home. Like we were talking about earlier before the video started, is I'm watching these fire through the peep in the kiln, and 5 minutes or 5 degrees makes all the difference in the world. Right. I mean, if I waited a few more minutes or 20 degrees hotter, more of this glaze would have fallen through those holes, maybe to the point where it couldn't stand up anymore.
Right. So you probably have to figure out where to stop it, because then there's more heat work in the kiln and it keeps melting after you turn it off.
It keeps melting when I turn it off. Sometimes when I've gotten to a point where it's like, oh shit, something bad is happening, I have to I'm crash cooling a little bit. Yeah, just drop a couple hundred degrees quickly.
Yeah. Now, so you don't really put many pieces in the kiln?
One at a time now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
One at a time.
Yeah. So then you zero it in. Are you looking at the drip or the top of it?
I have just some barrel kilns, and so the peeps are really small.
Oh, okay.
And so I have to, which is something I like to work on. I want to build a new kiln with some
for yourself, yeah.
But right now, usually I try to set up the peephole like right around right here, right where the action's going to happen, where it's most critical.
Right.
And I'm learning a lot about how the drip works. Like some of these are the same glaze formula, some of them are different, but they doesn't really matter because other factors besides temperature and chemistry are at play. Like the mass of this, if this was a really thin grid, it would melt at a different temperature. Or
you mean the glaze would melt differently because it's touching that?
Because it's touching that, right. If this is really, really thick, it's got so much mass that it's heating up slower than everything else. And so it's keeping everything cooled down. And so the mass of this matters, the size of the hole matters. So like, you know, if this is a bigger hole, then it takes, the glaze doesn't have to be as melted before it can fall through it.
Right.
Whereas if it's a really small hole, it needs to be like this. You can see the holes are much smaller and the drip is much skinnier.
Right.
And it's also just much less strong.
Right.
But there's also a lot of drama here and excitement.
Right.
So it's very exaggerated.
It's like frozen in space or time. Like it's kind of it's very active looking, even though it's static.
And I love the negative space in between the footnotes.
Yeah.
Okay, so my big thing is conceptually, this never occurred to me until I saw your work, because I always think of a glaze as a thin surface decoration.
Right.
And now you've made it substantial to the point where it dominates your form.
Right.
So now your form isn't the grid pattern, your
Right.
form is the glaze
It's true.
that's coming through. And that idea,
I mean, on a lot of these, there's more glaze than there is ceramic.
very
Yeah.
much so.
And the foam stuff is interesting because the foam is a glaze, but it is very much taking on the form, right?
This
Right.
is super, super light.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
There's a lot of air in the foam.
So
Oh,
that is an offshoot of this, or which came first?
The glaze definitely came first, but I see them as pretty related. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
taking this material, it's coming through these holes. I like this because it allows me to, it's not just gravity, it's pressure,
I
right?
see.
But
Oh.
it's still
Because
related.
you feel the inside
I feel
and
the
then it
inside,
oozes
And then it
out.
exactly.
Okay.
And I love the color. I mean, the relatedness.
Yeah.
is totally to your old work.
But like if I put glaze in this, it would all just come out the bottom.
Right.
No foam would be
No
out here.
puffing, yeah.
No puffing would be there.
Well, now tell me about these little swirly cues you got going here on this one.
Yeah, so this is a discovery that I made basically out of failure. I had some pieces that these glaze strips were really, really long and dangerous and just breaking and impossible to be shipping out or anything like that, and just didn't look nice. But I kind of just on a whim was like, I wonder if I could fix that at all. And I thought, I'll torch this and see what happens. And when I torched it, I thought, I'm going to torch it in my work, but then it's going to break as it cools.
Yeah.
But then it didn't.
Oh man.
And so basically, so this was, maybe this tall, and I torched it, keeping the flame away from the ceramic.
Right.
Because if the ceramic heats up, it wants to
will
pop for
break,
sure. And these really fat drips, they cannot be torched. There's just too much
Mass.
it's too much mass, it's too
Yeah.
thick, there's too much differential of temperatures. But the skinny ones seem to work.
And then you just twist
It's
it.
really just gravity.
Or it
so
just falls down.
It just falls down.
Okay.
And
It
so
rolls up on itself.
if I torch it, it'll just flop over. But if I torch it carefully at the top and wait till the curl starts
yeah.
and then move it down, it'll just kind of
Oh,
start
that's
snowballing
cool.
on itself.
Yeah.
But this was basically as low as I could get it without torching the grid.
Yeah.
Now, do you see these things like because your background's in function, and I know you did wood firing. So do you see this as almost like a functional tray? Do you see it as a conceptual piece or like a display? How do you see it? How do you categorize it?
I see them as conceptual art. I see them as an example of my fascination with ceramics and discoveries that I'm interested in, and they happen to be functional. And a lot of that is because of the gallery that I'm sending them to. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I know I know context is important, and I know that vessels are interesting, and I love ceramics, or I love pottery, and I love vessels, and so I thought this would be the right place to do this kind of work, where it is at least referencing something
Because
functional.
you've got a foot, you've got some
Yeah,
kind of
right.
elevation,
Absolutely.
you've got a flat surface.
And like this one, for example, it's pretty strong. Like this one is breakable. I mean, it's safe enough to ship somewhere, and it can sit on a shelf, but I wouldn't be filling that up with fruits or vegetables.
Right.
No.
That's sitting on a shelf somewhere, and it's like, don't move it too much. This one is much stronger, and I made it on that way on purpose because it's got drama. It's not quite as much drama as that one,
Mhm.
but it might live a longer life.
Well, I like how these reverse, and so
Yeah.
this is the foot, and then the foot becomes the top, and it's very cool. So you're doing a lot of discovering of where this work is going as you're firing and
Yes.
as you're working.
Yes. And I get a piece out, and just like everybody, but it's like you see something.
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna do more of that.
Try some of that, yeah.
And then also, it's just like making pots too.
Yeah.
You flip it upside down at a certain point, and you're like, oh, what's that do?
Right.
And so that's all that is. One interesting thing is, like for these, I fired it on the 4 corners, there's posts, and so no glaze could really be there, right?
Oh, I see.
So
yeah.
this one though, I fired it hanging upside down, and because of the weight, I could just put 2 pins right here.
I
And
see.
so it's half the amount of posts,
I
and it
see.
allows more glaze to be over to the edges, and just less limited in there.
Yeah, fantastic.
So,
And then how do you decide like how to put these on? This I'm assuming this is like strips of clay or something.
I mean, I made it like I'd make Nerikomi pattern. Like
Oh,
I made a
okay.
big block of pattern.
Okay.
And
Like yeah.
Well, here's a great example.
right, yeah, this
Oh,
one's
yeah,
checkers.
yeah.
Like where you got a
Fantastic.
checkerboard on it.
Yeah.
So I like the idea that you're creating the own design and how it spreads out
Yeah.
outside of that center.
And then it like destroys itself as it's going through. That's
Oh,
yeah.
But there's something really successful about that one because the pattern is so identifiable still, but it's
Yeah.
got the abstraction. It's still recognizable, but it's got that movement that makes it really nice. Yeah, this one you can see the pattern pretty well too, but these it's harder to see it. But,
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, how many pieces are going to be in the show?
I have 20 pieces, and they're roughly like this, but I have some bigger ones and smaller ones too. Maybe it's only 3 or 4 foam pieces like this, and a lot of it is the glaze strips, which I'm calling Nerikomi glaze. I'm trying to brand it, or clay glaze works too.
Oh, that's what you work on, a clay glaze.
I've been making something like clay glaze for a long time, and just now using it in my art more. But I called it clay glaze forever. But Nerikomi glaze just sounds a little bit more close to what I'm doing with it, because I'm
Yeah.
doing the patterning and colored clay
Yeah.
thing with it. Clay
But
glaze-
it's cool because clay glaze. I mean, not that you would. I'm telling you what to call it, but it's a good, interesting thing for powers because you're on the liminal area. You're in between
Yeah.
both of those, and then you're doing the same thing with the form, and it's becoming something else. So that's very cool.
And just the way you, like we talked about at the beginning, because almost all potters think of glazes as a liquid that you dip stuff in.
Right.
And you're creating blocks of it
Mhm.
like this to create the pattern. So it's a solid material that you're acting as clay, and nobody would have think, oh, that's a great glaze.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, it's evolving as we go. I mean, the work won't even look like this in a few months, I'm sure, because I'm in discovery, overload right now. Just like these glaze strips have only happened a few weeks ago, and it's like, wow, what am I going to do with that? You know what I mean? Have you ever seen anything like that before?
No, never seen that.
I had no idea that
I
was
would have thought
possible.
that would have broke for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
me too. Me too. And even on the cooling, because I
Yeah.
mean, people get crazy all over it, and I just
Or you have to anneal it or something to make it work.
because
yeah.
it seems closer to glass because
Yeah.
of the viscosity.
Yeah.
I think so. This is the glaze itself is it's low fire temperatures,
Yeah.
and so there's boron in there,
Yeah.
and I assume boron is part of it.
Okay.
Its ability, the low expansion has got to be part of its ability to do those curls. I haven't tried it with a cone 10
I
glaze,
see.
but I wouldn't be surprised if the boron is a big part of it.
Well, this is cool because that could evolve many different ways, and making these forms has a lot of. You can do a lot of evolution with the form and with the dripping and curl. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I made a lot of trays for this show because of the functional thing. We're just thinking about at least referencing vessels, but I think I want to try to go vertical next with the glaze strips. You know what I mean? Just get some more taller pieces and just some big old fat drips. You know what I mean? Like this is not fat enough anymore. We gotta go bigger.
Well, and then because you're experimenting with you're a glaze person, you can adjust the formula to do see if you can get longer drips in your kiln. And,
That's true
yeah.
too. Yeah.
Or do multi-firings where you've got like a higher cone for different ones, and as you go down, you've got different tendrils, different thicknesses
Right,
and
yeah.
viscosity.
Right. Do a cone 6 drip and then do an 04 drip, and
Yeah.
then maybe do
Cool, yeah.
a really low drip.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. Well, thanks guys. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Very fantastic.
This is super neat.
Thanks for your questions.
You got anything else you want? Anything coming to mind?
I mean, I don't know. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I feel pretty good about
Yeah.
it. What do you think? I mean,
Fantastic.
that was kind of what I wanted to cover. What do you think?
I think it's great.
Okay.